60 miles per hour in this all-new Honda CR-V Hybrid. So one of the nice things about this hybrid system is that it actually is more powerful than the standard gas option. That's why it's in the sport trim levels. So this is a new two-motor hybrid system that Honda has designed. As the name implies, it does have two electric motors, and that's going to be paired to a 2-liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine, as well as a battery pack. Total system output on this is going to be 204 horsepower, 246 pound-feet of torque. Now, if you remember the previous generation, that's actually a little bit less on the horsepower, but quite a bit more on the torque. And this is actually the torqueiest CR-V that Honda has ever made. But as far as accelerating up to speed, what you just saw, it feels quite nice behind the wheel. Definitely more than what I remember the 1.5-liter turbo feeling like. As you'd expect, it does have more power, but you also have that electric torque on board. So when you press down, you get that initial surge of instantaneous electric torque, and then the engine kicks in and really propels you on your way. Now, before we go any further, let me go ahead and introduce Josh Dunkelberger. He is here with me today in place of Mason, who could not attend this event, and he's helping me out with all things video. So thanks for being here, Josh.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Now, we have extensively tested the EXL trim level of the all-new CR-V, which that has the 1.5-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, which does make 190 horsepower. If you want to see an in-depth test drive of that, go ahead and head over to our channel, and like I said, you'll see a lot of in-depth content about how that performs. But today we're gonna, really keep our focus here on the hybrid, because I think for a lot of people, you're really thinking about hybridization for the very first time, and you're wondering, is it now time for me to go ahead and pick the hybrid? Especially now that Honda is making half of the trim levels hybrid exclusive. In my opinion, the two trim levels that look quite a bit better than the other two trim levels as well. So I want to go ahead and do another acceleration run here, because it's a little downhill, but it's nice and straight. To say, I'm actually quite impressed. It definitely feels substantially quicker to me than the standard 1.5 turbo, and it just feels really nice behind the wheel. It's not, of course, like the 2.5 turbo in the Mazda CX-50, but this is more than adequate for the average person's everyday use. Now, another thing you might have been noticing was the transmission. So this does have an eCVT transmission, but Honda has added a new shift simulation this year versus what they had previously. It's really a good simulation. It's actually quite realistic. I feel like a lot of people aren't even going to realize that this is a version of a continuously variable transmission. And you just have the fact that it overall is very responsive. So when you put your foot down, you don't have to wait a long time. You don't have this weird rubber bandy feel like some older CVTs have had in the past. It's really nice and responsive. Now, of course, when it comes to a hybrid system, you do have a lot of, handoffs between running on electric power and gas power. And I'm happy to say Honda continues to make a very, very smooth system. Really, the only thing that indicates to you that you switched over to engine power is the audible side of things. You can hear the engine if you're really hard on the throttle. But otherwise, if you're underneath of, basically on this gauge cluster, we've got the percentage of the power you're using. If you stay under 50% of available power, you're not going to hear or feel the switch between the electric power and the gasoline motor power. And I'm really happy about that, because that's what you want. You want that seamless feel, that you're not constantly reminded, oh, I'm on gas, now I'm on electricity, whatever. You want a seamless feel that feels like one cohesive unit. And Honda has really worked hard to tune this in a way that I do believe it feels like one cohesive unit. Now we're heading towards the highway right now, but before we get there, I do want to mention something. It's probably not the most, prevalent thing that a CR-V owner is thinking about, but I do want to mention it because Honda still did a great job. That's going to be the chassis and the handling. So Honda always kind of bakes in a little bit more athleticism than many of their rivals, and that does continue for this model. It's actually 15% stiffer than the previous generation, and you can actually feel that as you go around corners or as I just turn here on a straight line. And the steering is also very responsive. You have immediate reaction, even though it is of course a little bit light, as you'd expect for this type of vehicle.
Continue on US 101 north for 2 miles. In 2 miles, take exit 154 toward Los Alamos, Vandenberg Air Force Base.
So I don't know if you could hear that, but I was in the sport mode before I took off there, and you actually do have an audible difference. Honda is kind of making a little bit of a synthetic noise enhancement into the cabin. So it does have a different kind of sound when you put it into the sport mode. I don't know if people will like that or not. You know, most CRV owners probably are not going to even use sport mode to start with, but you know, if you do want to drive your CRV more aggressively and you put it in sport mode, it does make the throttle response quite a bit more responsive and give you that extra sound enhancement, although it doesn't really do anything with the steering system. And since I am talking about drive modes, I should mention that in addition to having your normal mode and your sport mode, you also have the Econ mode, which of course is going to have the basically opposite effect as sport mode, just kind of desensitizing everything for most efficiency. Sorry about that, that keeps interrupting me. And then you do also have a new snow mode this year as well. And when you accelerate more like a civilized being, we were just using about 25% of the available power, and it still felt plenty powerful getting up to highway speeds, and very quiet as well, which I think is a very important thing because a lot in this class can sound very strained, and this doesn't sound very strained unless you really go hammer time on it. So we're on Highway 101 here in California. Not the smoothest road of all time, but as you know, we like to get our sound level readings here at Car Confections, and I'll go ahead and let Josh fire up our sound level reader and get a reading here at 55 miles per hour.
All right, so it looks at 55 miles an hour. We're going to be around 61.2 decibels. So, like Drew said, it's not the best road in the world, but it's still very quiet. You know, Honda's told us that they put a lot of work into deadening the sound as compared to the previous generation. I think that's really evident with all the driving we've been doing with it today.
Right, absolutely agree with that. The previous generation definitely skewed on the louder side of the segment. We'll reserve final verdict for when we get this back to Lexington and we drive it on, you know, the exact same roads as some of its competition like the RAV4, but I do think that they've insulated it enough to be very competitive with the segment. Let's also discuss the ride quality out here on the highway. This road is pretty smooth, but we've been on some really bumpy roads. Josh can attest throughout our time that we spent with this CRV today, and it really handles it very, very nicely. I'm quite impressed. We've got the 19-inch wheels on this example today, so quite a 1 inch bigger than the previous EXL that we sampled, and it still rides very nice. One of the things I'm really impressed by is actually how solid everything feels just together as one cohesive piece. It just, when you hit a bump, everything feels tight. It feels solid, and a lot more solid than the previous generation.
Yeah, I totally agree. You know, this car just really knows how to soak up every single bump in the road. It was just so comfortable getting to drive it today, and I really have no complaints when it comes to the ride quality of this vehicle. You know, this is a car for the family, and so getting into this and making your way across the country would be an easy and very comfortable thing to do.
All right, so Josh is going to tell us what the fuel economy is for this hybrid, because that, of course, is really a big priority of a lot of people, is to get good fuel economy these days with gas prices as astronomical as they are.
Yeah, exactly. So we're driving the hybrid version of the CRV today, and There is going to be a front-wheel drive and all-wheel drive version, but the only way that you can get that front-wheel drive version is if you opt for the Sport trim. The Sport Touring trim is only available in all-wheel drive. But if you do opt for that hybrid front-wheel drive, you will have 43, 36, 40 combined miles per gallon. And if you opt for the all-wheel drive on either the Sport or the Sport Touring, you will get 40, 34, 37. And just also to mention, the non-hybrid 1.5 turbo gets, for front-wheel drive, 30 overall, and for all-wheel drive, just one less at 29.
So, as you can tell by that, that's a substantial improvement for this hybrid model. You get a big bump in fuel economy, up to 43 miles per gallon in the city for that front-wheel drive hybrid model. So that by itself is really a huge reason why you might consider the hybrid. And of course, it's got tons and tons of other advantages, which we talked about throughout the video. And that's going to be today's slam dunk. That fuel economy is, like I said, very impressive. Now, we spent the day with this CR-V hybrid, and we were discussing what we wanted the airball to be. And I think the most obvious thing is some of the missing features that you have on this fully loaded CR-V. So a lot of the competition is offering kind of some extra bougie features that the CR-V is missing. What comes to mind? Full digital gauge cluster, head-up display, no panoramic sunroof on this either, and no ventilated seats. So those are kind of 4 features that I do think Honda should add, and maybe they will eventually do like an elite version of the CR-V and add those features in.
All right, let's go ahead and jump into the pricing of this all-new 2023 CR-V. As Drew mentioned earlier in the video, we are not going to have that base LX trim level anymore, so we're going to start immediately at the EX trim level, which is going to be standard non-hybrid. So looking at that EX, you're going to be starting at a price of $31,110. And the next trim level up is the Sport, which is standard hybrid, looking at $32,450. Then you go back to the EXL, which is non-hybrid, at $33,760. And finally, what we're driving today is the Sport Touring with standard all-wheel drive, coming in at $38,600.
All right, so it is time to conclude. Now, at the beginning of the video, I asked the question, is this the CR-V to buy? And I have to say, after spending the entire day with this new CR-V hybrid, the answer is yes. There are really just so many advantages to choosing this hybrid model, and it doesn't even cost barely a little premium over top of that even base model. I feel like a lot of people are especially going to choose that Sport trim level because that gets you really great standard features. You get the hybrid powertrain, the best fuel economy of the bunch, and you still get basically the entire look of this Sport Touring model on the outside. But like I said, overall, I mean, I feel like Honda really nailed this formula, and it's easy to believe that this is going to continue to be a very great selling vehicle.